the honourable member for Calgary Rocky Ridge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, it's my pleasure, as always, to rise in this place and add to the debate, this time on Motion 18, an act to amend the standing orders of the House of Commons. So here we are. We're on the second day of debate on this motion, and we're on the fourth last scheduled sitting day of session under extended sitting hours and talking about the changes to the standing orders. So how did this happen and how did we get here? Well, in order to explain the position that I'm going to take on this bill and how I'm going to use my vote and my voice on behalf of my constituents in Calgary Rocky Ridge, I'm going to explain a little bit of the context that's behind this motion for the benefit of constituents watching at home. So at the time of dissolution of the last Parliament, the Liberals, they were the third party in the House. They had 30-odd seats. They had a new untested leader. And they had little to lose. And they came up with an idealistic platform. It included many promises that were designed to capture the imagination of Canadians, and in contrast with a government that was very familiar to Canadians by virtue of its having won 3 consecutive elections and governing for nearly 10 years. So one might go as far as to say the Liberals' 2015 platform perhaps was designed more to improve from third-party status than to be a serious platform under which to govern. It contained a lot of promises, including a modest deficit of $10 billion, stimulatory, not structural deficit that would result in immediate GDP growth and a swift return to balance. Well, obviously that didn't happen. They also contained a promise to change the voting system within the first 18 months. That also didn't happen. They also had a promise to modernize the House of Commons. And what that meant was fairly vague. They threw out some idealistic buzzwords and mused about whether the House of Commons could be made more family-friendly. A worthy ideal for many of us. I'm a husband and a father of 3 children, so I'm all for family friendliness. They really only had 4 specific promises related to standing orders. They promised that they would amend the standing orders to prevent omnibus bills. They promised not to use prorogation. They promised they would instill a British-style Prime Minister's questions, compelling the Prime Minister to answer all the questions 1 day a week. And that they would change the estimates process so that the main estimates would reflect the current budget. So we know that Canadians took this government at its word in the election, and they elected them on the strength of these and many other idealistic promises. But soon enough, the Liberals began to discover that reality is a tough place. It's an unforgiving place, and once elected, reality is unescapable. And one by one, the Liberal promises have been broken, set aside, or just plain abandoned. So the Liberals' first attempt at what they called modernizing the House of Commons could more properly be called muzzling the opposition and disenfranchising the millions of Canadians who elected the 154 members of the opposition parties on this side of the House. It happened last year when Motion 6 tried to impose limits on debate and give members of the government additional powers over the House. Well, that motion fortunately was abandoned on the night of the long elbows last May. After that, the government expended enormous amounts of political capital, committee time, public money, and teasing the activist base that whose support they stole from the NDP in the last election on their failed electoral reform agenda. Following that, the government then took its second stab at fulfilling their election promise on standing orders reform with its absurdly called discussion paper, delivered after hours on a Friday in March, followed by a motion with a deadline at the Procedure and House Affairs Committee the next week. That motion and the so-called discussion paper called for all kinds of draconian and thoroughly undemocratic measures, including limiting debate through giving the government the power to pre-allocate time in the House of Commons, limiting debate at committees, reducing the number of sitting days each week, thus reducing the number of days that the government would be compelled to be accountable to Canadians by facing the opposition in the House, especially during question period. When the reaction by the opposition parties was swift and predictable, recognizing what was at stake, the Conservatives and the NDP used every means available under the existing standing orders to prevent the government from proceeding. And at the height of the standing orders debacle at Proc, the Globe and Mail wrote an editorial which pointed out that in a majority parliament, when a government can pass any law or motion it wants, the opposition really only has two weapons at its disposal: moral suasion and the power to delay. Mr. Speaker, both of those weapons were used to maximum effect, and eventually the government realized that the opposition would go to any lengths to prevent them from changing the standing orders without all-party consent, something that no other government has had the arrogance or contempt for opposition to attempt before. Mr. Speaker, that perhaps is wherein lies the rub. The Liberals seem quite sincere in their belief in that which makes it easier and more convenient for the government and limits the ability of the opposition to hold them accountable is somehow democratic. The government side members seem sincerely to believe that the opposition should merely act as spectators. Well, Mr. Speaker, it's been said before by me and by many of my colleagues, we're not an audience. We are the opposition. We were elected to this place, just like each member on the other side was. We were elected by people that do not support this government's agenda, and they expect us to speak on their behalf. They expect us to demand accountability. They expect us to examine proposed expenditures. They do not expect us to simply act as mere spectators. They expect vigorous debate and robust daily question periods attended by the Prime Minister. They certainly don't expect us to surrender the very limited tools that we possess to do the job that, as it turns out, we were elected to do. And this brings me to the present and the details of this motion before us. At first glance, it might appear not unreasonable, a compromise perhaps, compared with the outrageous motion 6, or the machinations that happened at Proc, and the absurd statements that the government House Leader has been making for months. In fact, one might, for a moment, be tempted to even give credit to the government for abandoning nearly all the draconian changes signaled by their March so-called discussion paper and its motion 6 of last year. But before doing that, let's consider what this motion actually does and how it stacks up to the Liberals' supposedly sacrosanct commitment to delivering on the specific election promises related to standing orders and so-called modernization of the House of Commons. With this motion, the government has abandoned its promise to it's abandoned its promise to change the standing orders for a Prime Minister's question period. Perhaps they've finally realized that this is something they could have done all along without a change to the standing orders. Or perhaps they've realized just how poorly this Prime Minister performs, and so they're not so keen on the idea of a Prime Minister's question period. This motion's so-called modernization of the estimates process, secondly, the estimates process, it actually reduces the amount of time for committees to review the estimates. That's reducing accountability. And giving the Speaker the power to split a bill, but not a budget-related bill, and only for this Parliament, really is a joke within the context of the Liberals' promise and their past objections to omnibus legislation and the number of omnibus bills that they've already tabled makes this part of the motion hilariously cynical, Mr. Speaker. Lastly, the requirement to table a prorogation press release is also ridiculous, given the Liberals' promises and their past statements on this subject. So in short, Mr. Speaker, despite the fact that this appears now to be merely token lip service to standing orders reform, I could never support this bill, because to do so would be to reward this government for its cynicism and for its spectacular incompetence. There is no way, Mr. Speaker, that we will let them claim that their grotesque mismanagement of this file has somehow ended in all-party support. Also party support that they have never seriously tried to obtain. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? Conseil commentaire. The Honourable Member for Toronto, Danforth.
Well, I would like to thank the member opposite for his comments. I think that he seems to underestimate the respect that we all have on this side for having very good discussions, robust discussions in committee. I know that in my committee, I am always happy to hear thoughts and to debate what we can do to make things better and how we can proceed on different studies. So I would like to point that out. And in that respect, one of the things that I found in this motion that was interesting is the Standing Order 116 change, which actually allows for the continuation of debate as long as somebody is interested in participating. And I wonder if he does not see value in that, in continuing robust debate in committee between all members from all parties who be represented.
The honourable member for Calgary Rocky Ridge.
Well, Mr. Speaker, my committee, the Access to Information Privacy and Ethics Committee, also has broad cooperation, and we get along quite well on that committee, and we're proud of the work that we have done there. So that's not really the concern I have. The concern is at PROC, and I don't know if this member would characterize what went on there as being in the same vein of cooperation. What happened there was just an outrage and an affront to democracy by trying to ram through changes to the standing orders without all party consent. And I will point out to for the benefit both of this member and others that there are members on the government side that saw the cynicism and saw the outrageous contempt for our institutions that were at play in their attempt to change the standing orders. And some spoke out about it, and they deserve credit for doing so. So I know that many members on that side agreed with the opposition in the mistreatment that was at work in that debate.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Pickering Uxbridge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in the last election, knocking on doors, I heard a lot from my residents concerned with the previous Harper government's use of omnibus legislation and the abuse that the government had taken previously to ram through legislation. So this was one of the election commitments that not only members in my riding, but for all members on this side of the House were elected on. And this is a direct response to that commitment that we made. So I guess my question for the honourable member is, does he feel then that the continuation and the abuse of omnibus legislation that the Harper government used should just continue?
The honourable member for Calgary Rocky Ridge.
Mr. Speaker, if this was raised at the doors in her riding, I wonder how it's going to go when she returns to those doors next time. She's going to have some awfully disappointed constituents.
Questions and comments?